Now we're live. So welcome everybody to the first ever StreamYard live version of the Nairobi Health Show. And I've got Robert Sikes here. The Keto Savage is his trademark. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Robert.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is terrific. And as I mentioned in our false start before Dave, the first time ever StreamYarder did not hit go live, Robert has a great site, the Keto Savage, and he invited me to be on his show, and it was a great episode. And as I interviewed him, I knew that he had a lot of great stuff just from him interviewing me. I thought, this is a guy I want to have on my show. So, Robert, I appreciate you doing that. And for those of you watching and listening in, let me read a brief bio. And then, Robert, I do want you to dive a little bit deeper into this and tell us a little bit more about your backstory. Absolutely. But I do with everyone this bio, the potted bio. Robert Sikes is a natural bodybuilding competitor, a keto expert, podcaster, vlogger, and all-around swell guy. He's spoken at several ketogenic conferences, including Keto Con and the Low Carb Cruise and others. And I want to read you this testimonial from his website, which I think tells his story well. Robert is by far one of the most knowledgeable people out there on the keto diet and performance athletics. As his client, you have 24/7 access to bug him with all of your questions, and he'll get back to you unbelievably fast. There's a lot of controversy out there about whether you can build muscle on keto. With Robert's help, I put on 10 pounds of lean muscle in 3 months. That's a great story.
Yeah. I think, I love coaching. It's not my main thing, but I've always enjoyed it because it keeps me on the cutting edge. It keeps me sharp. I'm able to kind of experiment with myself and my clients. So I think it's been great.
And what brought you to this point? Let's hear a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, so what brought me to keto in the first place, I've been natural bodybuilding for about 12, 13 years now. And then I'd followed traditional bro dieting approach for about 6 of those years. And I had done well. I'd placed well at the shows. I'd, earned several titles with that. But then I developed a bunch of eating disorders after my first competition. Wow. I had bulked up to 230 pounds, and I'm only 5'8", so that was a lot of body fat. And when I cut down, I lost about 80 pounds in 3 months, and I got really lean, and it was effective in that sense, but it was not healthy, and that's where my eating disorder stemmed from. So that just was not sustainable. I was looking for a better, healthier alternative, and that kind of led me down the road of the ketogenic diet. Of course, this was way back in 2014 and 15 before there was any popularity around keto. There wasn't any articles or books or podcasts or resources at that time. So I kind of stumbled into it by accident just through trial and error, but recognized that I started feeling and performing better in the absence of carbohydrates, and then just started dialing that in. And I actually was able to earn my pro card status all while following a ketogenic diet. And I've since pretty much just dedicated my life and my business to bringing that knowledge forward and, educating others how to properly implement and optimize the ketogenic diet.
Very interesting. Are you familiar with Ben Greenfield?
Yeah, I've had him on the podcast.
Interesting. So you talked about, 2014, 2015, the emergence of keto. Well, I was following Ben at the time, and I was doing the exact opposite of you. So this is really interesting. I was doing endurance sports. Mm-hmm. And when I was getting ready for the national championships in Olympic distance triathlon, Ben had just put out the low carb diet for triathletes, mm-hmm. which he admitted was kind of an experiment. At the time, he was doing exactly what you just said. So where in your case, it's like, can a guy, not just a guy, but can a person put on muscle in the ketogenic diet and have good health and all these other things? The exact same question was being asked in the endurance world.
Yeah.
Can an endurance athlete fuel with fat was basically the question, right?
It's interesting because, keto popularity and momentum. There are many people wanting to lose body fat and just lose weight, and ketos gain a lot of popularity there. But from a performance sector, it's really exciting for me to see both endurance athletes and, bodybuilders and people focused on hypertrophy really benefit from a ketogenic diet. So that's been exciting to see.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And so you were kind of in the muscle side of it, and he and others, I'm sure, were on the endurance side of it. And that experiment is largely over now, I would say. now keto is more than just a buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of good information. There's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of people who've researched this. There's a lot of coaches out there. So it seems like keto is a lot more legitimized for sure now than it was 5 years ago. Yes,
absolutely. It's gained a lot of popularity with regard to the medical community as well, in regard to, patients with cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, things of that nature from a brain neurological standpoint with regard to how the ketone bodies operate in the brain. From a performance standpoint, there's definitely been a lot of momentum gained. It's interesting, though, because there's still a lot more progress that needs to be made. Unfortunately, many of the scientific studies are taking a test pool of subjects that are not fully keto adapted. They'll put them on a diet for a couple weeks, which honestly, I mean, you can register ketones in that time, but you're not going to be fully fat adapted in that time. So it's apparent that a lot of the scientific literature out on it from a performance sector is not perfectly designed studies, but it has gotten much, much better over the past couple of years.
Okay, so I want to back up just for a second, because I always want to recognize that there's people that are not fully versed in the buzzwords and things that we use. And I never want to leave anyone out. So for anyone listening who may not have done keto, or maybe it is just a buzzword to them and they don't know what it is, could you give us a basic definition and understanding? Imagine you're teaching someone who's never heard of it. How would you explain briefly what it is?
Yeah, so if you really distill it down to its essence, the keto diet is simply changing your body's primary fuel source. On a traditional diet, you're using carbohydrates and glucose for fuel. With a ketogenic diet, you're using fat and ketones for fuel. So you're basically shifting your body's primary fuel source. And this is an evolutionary process that humans have evolved to do and survive with during times of scarcity. But you can do it from a nutritional standpoint as well by simply removing carbohydrates and sugars and grains from your diet pretty much completely. And then your body will learn to adapt and become fat adapted and know how to leverage the fat that you consume, the dietary fat you consume, and also your stored body fat, and harness that as the primary energy source.
And you have been living that way for, what'd you say, 6 years?
6 years roughly? Consistently. I have not had a carbohydrate meal in 6 years.
Haven't had a single carbohydrate meal. Now you've had carbs, of course, but very few.
Yeah, I mean, the extent of my carbohydrate intake is just simply trace carbs through, like a salad, something like that, just the green vegetation. But yeah, no sugars, no grains, no legitimate carbohydrate predominant meal in 6 years.
Right, but you eat vegetables.
A little bit. I don't eat a ton of vegetables, but I do eat some vegetables.
Okay, well, let's start with that. What do you eat? Let's just make it real practical. Could you remember what you had yesterday for your meals?
Yeah, I pretty much track all my macronutrients because I'm trying to optimize for certain performance goals. So a typical day of eating for me would include about 2 meals. I'll wake up and I'll have a fatty coffee, which is simply a cup of coffee with some heavy cream in there, about 4 tablespoons of heavy cream. I'm doing a nootropic blend. It's got some MCT oil powder in there. It's got some chaga mushrooms, lion mane mushrooms, things of that nature. I'll have that in the morning, and that will keep me sustained for several hours. My first actual meal will typically consist of about 2 ounces of liverwurst. It'll consist of a can of sardines and one of my Keto Bricks, which is a 1,000-calorie ketogenic meal replacement bar that I've crafted. And then my second and final meal will be about a pound of 75-25 grass-fed finished beef with about 6 whole eggs and maybe a tablespoon or 2 of olive oil.
Interesting. And you do that a lot, like that. What you just said, that's a pretty common day.
Yeah, that's definitely my go-to right there.
Interesting. Are you a family man? Are you single? And the reason I'm asking, not to get all personal, it's about sustainability and eating with other people in your house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm married. I've been married for almost 2 years now. My wife does keto. I got into keto in the beginning, and then she was struggling with a bunch of digestive issues. She has all kinds of like slow transit bowel, things of that nature, and she found keto to be very healthy for her, very, very good for her whole digestive tract. So she started doing keto, and then she's been doing it ever since as well. We don't have any kids yet, but that may be in the future here soon.
And those would be keto kids.
Absolutely, keto kids.
Yeah, you can see why I'm asking the question, I'm sure, because let's get into one of the dilemmas of keto. Keto is kind of hard to sustain, especially if there's people in your home that you eat with that don't want to do it, or worse, want to kind of subtly derail your efforts. It's almost like a game for the keto person at the party, for someone to be tempting them with ice cream and cake and snacks and whatever. And I can only imagine that having your wife do it with you, it makes all the difference. But many people listening may not have that. Could you talk about that and the sustainability of keto in a situation where you don't have support?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it's with any type of dietary regimen, whether it's keto or not, like if you're trying to be disciplined towards your nutritional goals, you're always going to have people that are trying to sabotage that. And oftentimes it's not maliciously. They just want to go out and have a drink. They want to go out and, overindulge in certain foods. I view everything through the context of, what are my goals in life? What are my nutritional goals? What are my health goals? What are my performance goals? I want to live my life in a way that is in line and congruent with that. With keto, for instance, once I recognized how much better I felt and performed, both physically and mentally, to me, the appeal of that was far superior to the appeal of a temporary, night on the town, having a bunch of alcohol or a bunch of cheesecake or something of that nature. So that drew me to the ketogenic diet. And there's no really temptation for me, because once I recognized what my body preferred, what I benefited from, that was just so much more an appeal to me than the alternative. For people that have, a spouse, for instance, that's not on the same page, you can't beat it into them. The best thing that you can do is simply live by example, and then ideally they would recognize how much better you feel and perform and want to follow suit.
Now, alcohol can be a big one for people. Were you a drinker before?
No, not really. I mean, you can still have some alcohol on keto. I mean, a glass of wine is totally fine. Sometimes I'll have Zevia is a brand of basically keto-friendly soft drink. So sometimes I'll have a Zevia in place of like a Coke with like a splash of whiskey or something of that nature. And that's not going to really disrupt your ketone production. So once you're fat adapted, you can tolerate a little bit of alcohol without having any issues.
Okay, interesting. Is there, you were very specific when I asked you about your nutrition. Another challenge people have when they go on any diet, whether it's keto or what we teach, it doesn't matter what your dietary philosophy is, the rubber hits the road in the kitchen and or the restaurant. When it's time to order or time to make your food, you kind of got to know what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And that right there may be the most difficult part of any diet. Wandering into the kitchen and browsing through the pantry and the fridge, thinking, what am I going to eat? Mm-hmm. Right. So for people getting started, how do you help guide them to, develop out a routine, kind of like what you have done, so that they always have go-to meals?
Honestly, like simply removing everything in your house that is not congruent with the type of dietary and nutritional choices you're trying to make is a good place to start. So if you're trying to be serious about adopting a ketogenic diet, for instance, then you're probably going to remove all the Oreos and cupcakes from the cupboards, because it's just going to be there whispering in your ear to come, indulge. So removing that temptation in the first place is going to be good. In the very beginning, keto was such a undercover diet, so to speak. There wasn't any popularity around it, that you pretty much had to get it all from nutritionally dense, whole food, single ingredient sources, which is what I would always recommend to people. However, since keto has become very popular, there's a lot of, manufactured products that are much more in line with what people would want on a typical day-to-day. I mean, there's literally keto Pop-Tarts nowadays. Now, that's not an optimal version of keto, but it is certainly better than a traditional Pop-Tart would be, for instance. With regards to restaurants, honestly, I can go into any restaurant and keto-fy a meal. For instance, if you're getting burgers, just simply remove the bun. Go and it's a little bit more challenging because most of it has a pasta base, but you get like the meat sauce minus the pasta. But honestly, any restaurant, you can pretty much find a version that is going to be void of carbohydrates, or simply just removing like a piece of toast or something. It can be totally keto friendly once you adjust and adapt.
Okay. And physically or fitness wise, you are an athlete, you perform, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what you do, is natural bodybuilding different than physique competition, or are those words one and the same thing, or are they two different animals?
So physique it's basically a division of bodybuilding, for instance. So with any of the figure sports, you've got different divisions based off of male or female, based off the age group. So for instance, physique, classic bodybuilding, and then open bodybuilding are three different divisions. And then natural bodybuilding as a whole is just simply a bodybuilding event in which it is sanctioned by a third-party company that drug tests, or the event itself will drug test to ensure that none of the athletes competing are using performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, things of that nature.
Okay, and you've been doing natural bodybuilding for how long did you say?
12 or 13 years now. It's been a while, since I was a junior in high school, so quite some time.
And how long do you plan on doing that for?
Well, the beauty of natural bodybuilding is that it gets better as you get better. I mean, as you get older, it's like a fine wine. You just keep getting better with age. I mean, as long as you're continually progressively overloading the muscle with your training, lifting heavier, having some form of progressive overload, and you're eating properly, your body's going to continue to build muscle. It's going to continue to be better. A lot of the top level competitors in bodybuilding are actually in their 40s, 50s, more so than their 20s and 30s. Now, when you start taking performance enhancing drugs, if you go that route, they're typically going to be a little bit young, because it's kind of like a race to the bottom, so to speak, a race to the top with that, because your body can only sustain heavy drug use for so long. That's why I've always kind of gravitated towards the natural bodybuilding aspect. I want to see what my body's capable of in a totally safe and natural environment.
Well, I don't blame you for that. I mean, it's commendable. Keep things natural, keep drug free. Absolutely. Now, we had talked about one of the challenges of keto, which is sustainability, or maybe lack of support. And you have clients. And so what are some other difficulties that people might have adopting a ketogenic lifestyle?
Difficulties include, there's just so much information out there. With the popularity that keto has received over the past several years, there's a lot of so-called gurus and experts that think they know what is best, but they haven't really put forth the time and experience to test these theories and back up and see if it is effective. A lot of times people will come into the ketogenic diet with their stigma of what they had been doing previously and their fear of fat. So, you've just heard your entire life that fat is bad, it's going to clog your arteries. So they'll come into keto with that kind of burning in the back of their mind. They'll try to adopt a very low fat version of keto. But that's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because if you're taking in a very low intake of dietary fat, your hormones are not going to be optimized. You're never really going to truly become fat adapted. So your body's own production of ketones is not going to be optimized. So kind of removing your stigma with what nutrition is and should be prior to adopting keto at the door is going to be very, 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 very beneficial.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, you mentioned your first meal of the day being a drink, and again, back to my experience as doing endurance sports. Mm-hmm. I was first introduced to a drink like that by Ben Greenfield, and the first day I did it, I can't remember the exact recipe, but it was basically I used a coffee substitute, a coconut oil, no sweetener, of course. Mm-hmm. Cream, and I put some cinnamon for flavor. Mm-hmm. And I put all this, made a hot drink. It was very thin, and I drank it pretty quickly as soon as it cooled down. And I just thought, there's no way that this thing is going to give me energy. And I could not believe it. I mean, I had that drink at maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, and at noon, I realized I haven't eaten anything since that drink.
Mm-hmm. That's honestly pretty amazing. Yeah, that's the beauty of keto. One of the benefits. I mean, you're not a slave to eating every 2 or 3 hours like typical. Like it's typically the case when you're dependent on glucose. I mean, when you're spiking your insulin levels after each meal from a heavy carbohydrate-based meal, and then those insulin levels spike and they dip, and then before long you're hungry again. Whereas with keto, your blood sugar is much more regulated throughout the day. I mean, I never see my blood sugar above 90 really, even after a meal. So for me, there's just much more consistent energy. I never have these cravings. I mean, I'll oftentimes fast. Like I've done extended fasts of 5.5 days before. And I'm totally, fine. I function at a high rate, both physically and mentally. I feel sharper mentally, but from just simply a day-to-day standpoint, I'm not having to eat, every 2 or 3 hours. So I'm only eating once or twice, and I get much more accomplished in the course of a 24-hour period because I'm not constantly having to go in search of food.
Although, and I was a little bit surprised actually that you mentioned you had your first meal first thing in the morning. So you don't do intermittent fasting. So you're not like waiting in the morning till 10, 11 noon to have your first meal.
I'll oftentimes do intermittent fasting. So my drink contains 0 carbohydrates or protein. So it's kind of like a fat fast, so to speak. Fat is still going to elicit somewhat of an insulin response, but a very blunted insulin response. So I'll have that fatty drink in the morning simply because I'm training early in the morning. I like to have a little something on my stomach prior to training. So I'll have that. If I wasn't training, I'd probably skip that. But again, I'm in a building phase right now, so I'm not worried about having more calories in the morning and breaking that hard fast. If I'm in more of a deficit, if I'm trying to lose body fat, I'll oftentimes remove that, or I'll just do a single meal a day so that I have a much longer fasting window. Okay,
interesting. You've got this down to a science. Obviously, you're doing this a long time, and you know your body like. Well, I don't even know how to say it, but I mean, you know exactly what to do when. How did you learn all that? What were your sources to get so dialed in with your macros and your calories?
Honestly, it's been just trial and error over the course of 12, 13 years. I mean, one of the benefits of natural bodybuilding is that you become so attuned to what your body responds to and why. So it's pretty empowering, honestly. I mean, I could eat half of an avocado and tell you to the minute when my body's going to respond, how it's going to respond, and why. And I feel like anybody would benefit from having knowledge like that. I mean, so many people go through the day-to-day and they don't know why their body's feeling the way it is. They don't understand their aches and pains. They don't understand why they have stomach, indigestion. They don't understand why they're tired. And so much of it stems back to the nutrition they're having, the food they're eating. So knowing what your body's responding to and why, it just ensures that your quality of life is likely going to be much, much better.
Okay. I want to go backwards again. Something you mentioned early on a while back. You developed the Keto Brick.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about the Keto Brick. I kind of want one.
I'll think it's So the Keto Brick was never intended to be a product or something that I sold at all. When I was prepping for my 2017 competition, I was needing a very calorically dense nutrition source that took the guesswork out of my meal prep. I didn't want to have to spend a whole bunch of time prepping my meals for the week. And when I'm in a competition prep, I'm tracking everything to the T. So I just wanted to simplify that whole process. So I started, and at the time, like I said, keto was not very popular. So there wasn't any keto products on the market. So I started formulating in the kitchen. I came up with what I thought would be good, a good way to get a lot of calories in, a lot of dietary fat in without any carbohydrates or very minimal carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, and wouldn't create any sense of bloat because I wanted to be able to eat this prior to stepping on stage at a competition and not have any stomach bloat. So I started formulating. I came up with a product, showed it on my Instagram or my YouTube page because at the time I was documenting my entire prep on my YouTube channel. And I kept getting all this feedback like, what is this thing? Where can I get it? What's the recipe? I want to buy one. And I just kept writing it off as though it's nothing, just something I'm working on. And my mom, who's probably my only YouTube subscriber at the time, kept seeing these comments and she was like, you got to make this into a product. You got an audience here. You got to start selling these. So lo and behold, my girlfriend at the time, wife now, Crystal, she dove into what it would take to work with the health code regulations. I started diving into what it would take to create a physical product. And the next thing you know, we're making these things in our kitchen. And then we scale up and we start leasing a commercial kitchen space. And now we have 3 different buildings that we're leasing. And we make things all in-house. It's basically a 1,000 calorie brick. It's a little bit bigger than a bar. That's why we call it a brick. But it's 1,000 calories, perfectly in line with ketogenic macronutrients, and it doesn't cause any bloat. It's shelf-stable. It's pretty much the perfect meal replacement bar. I have one every single day.
What's in it?
A little bit of everything. The base is cacao. It's flavor. So the base is always cacao butter, which is very high in stearic acid, which is a really good energy source from a dietary fat standpoint. There's a protein powder in there. We have both vegetable-based protein and a whey-based protein. And then we have MCT oil powder. And then depending on the flavor, we have like some nut butter flavors. So we have peanuts. We have a toasted almond coconuts. We have a chocolate peanut butter cup, which is really popular. So depending on the flavor, that's kind of where the ingredients change, but it's very minimal ingredients, very low carbohydrates, very high dietary fat.
Okay. Well, I got to try that. I mean, that sounds like, I mean, I like the convenience of it. Just
Yeah.
to be able to take one brick and eat it and know that you're done and you've had a healthy meal. That's pretty slick.
Yeah, it's really popular with like backpackers because they want something that's really dense, but doesn't take up a lot of space. So a lot of backpackers have been starting to eat them.
Yeah, and you get sick of Cliff Bars.
Yeah. Well, I haven't had a Cliff Bar. I can't tell you how long, but I would imagine they would get old after a while.
They do, and nothing against Cliff Bars. I like Cliff Bars, but if you kind of add them as part of your routine as a healthy snack, there's something weird about them where it doesn't matter what flavors you do; they all taste like a Cliff Bar, and
Right.
you can't just change you just can't change from one flavor to another. You just kind of got to give up over time. At least that's what happened for me. So, a Keto Brick sounds like a good substitute.
I'll send you some.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, listen, what advice do you have for people in their health and fitness journey? And specifically, most of the people that follow us and listen to our podcast are middle-aged. The typical thing that they struggle with most when we do our polling, this is directly from polling, is weight and sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Corollary to sleep is having enough energy during the day. These are the things we're hearing from people. They're not necessarily wanting to go all out and become a competitor like you are or a serious athlete, but they definitely want to improve their health. So if you're talking to a person that fits that demographic, what are some of your big health tips, most important health tips?
So I'm probably going to be a little bit biased here, but I would definitely recommend they try the ketogenic diet to see and give it a good, honest several months to see how their body responds to it. And then with that, simply doing a very, very simplistic but tried and true form of keto, which is simply high dietary fat, moderate protein, very low carbs, and ideally all coming from single ingredient whole food sources. Like I said, I have a company for selling keto bricks, and I still recommend people prioritize whole single ingredient foods. There's so much, heavily processed foods out there that are not doing anything for you. So simply peeling all that away and focusing on single ingredient, wholesome, nutritious foods, ideally within those ketogenic macros if they're wanting to go that route. For me personally, my sleep improved, my hormone function, my metabolism. Speaking on metabolism, a lot of people whose primary goal is to lose weight, they'll oftentimes find themselves eating far too little for far too long. So people know, it's all about calories, right? So they'll cut calories drastically, and then they'll lose some weight, then they'll plateau, and after a while, there's not really any more calories to cut. So they'll just stay in a chronically underfed state, which is going to really downregulate their metabolism, which will also affect their sleep, their hormones, and everything else. So I would encourage people to just kind of take account of how much they're eating, and if they have been under eating for very long, then having a period of time where they focus on reverse dieting and actually increasing their caloric intake to upregulate their hormone function and metabolism. I think that would be a good place to start for sure.
Okay, well, good advice. Hey, listen, before I let you go, I want to show everyone our new, the Dirobi bottle. It's for sale on the website. Kind of pricey because this is custom made, but we don't mark them up. We sell them for what they cost us to make. But Robert, let me trade you one of these for some keto bricks. Let's just work out a fair trade. Would you like a Dirobi bottle?
It looks pretty slick. I'll drink out of it.
It's a 40-ounce insulated bottle. We're pretty happy with it, and just added them to the website last week. So
nice.
Let's just do a trade, just like on the school ground with cards. I got a bottle and you got bricks. Let's just trade.
Hey man, count me in.
Well, that sounds great. Well, before I let you go, have you got any other words of wisdom or advice from Robert's? This is Robert Sikes, everyone. For those of you who have joined us late, his handle online is the Keto Savage. And before we find out where people learn more about you, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think living life with intention. That seems very vague, but there was a period in my life where nutrition was just an afterthought. I didn't really focus on it. I didn't really focus on my training, my physical activity. But for me, no matter how much chaos is going on in the world right now, and right now there's a ton of chaos going on, if I can always return to having some solid baseline, and for me that baseline is making sure that every single day my nutrition is dialed in, and I'm doing some form of physical activity every day, I could tackle any other obstacle life throws at me with a much more clear and level head. And I feel like anybody can benefit from that regardless of what diet they're following or what activity they're pursuing. So simply having that as a simple baseline is going to be, that's going to help tenfold. That's going to be the best advice I can offer.
Well, that's terrific advice. I mean, we experience our whole life through our body. So it totally makes sense to me. I think that's excellent advice. How do people learn more about you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, so they can find me. KetoSavage.com is my website. Live Savage on Instagram, and then KetoBrick.com for the bricks. Okay, sounds good. And we republish these podcasts on our blog at blog.dirobi.com, where we'll also have show notes and links where you can access all of these things. If you're like driving in a car or something and can't like take action on any of this information, we'll have all those links and information about Robert on that website. And we'll send out an email to all our followers and on social media as soon as we publish. So Robert Sikes, thank you so much for coming on the interview. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. And to those of you listening, this is Dave Sherwin wishing you health and success.